Good afternoon, everyone. This is Robbie Ballard at the Carter James Ranch. Welcome back to the channel. Hey, I want to ask you to give the video a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. Today's topic, we're going to be talking about Cornish Cross meat chickens and the brooder setup. Hey, speaking of birds, how about those Kansas Jayhawks? The men's program won the national title and the women's program. They had a great year. Let's get into it. Let's talk about some brooder setup. So I want to show you what I have set up for my Cornish Cross birds. This is a large horse or cattle trough. It's about 8 feet across. And I use this when I've got 100 to 150 birds that I'm raising. Obviously, you don't need this big of a space if you're doing a smaller amount. You can use a box, you can use a smaller trough. There's all kinds of things that you can use that work. I just like having an area this big so I can do larger batches, and it gives them really good space. So the first thing I want to talk about is the space. I think it's so important to give these chickens room to move around. They do grow so quickly. A Cornish Cross bird goes from a day-old chick to being processed at 7 or 8 weeks. And so if they don't have the space, they'll tend to sit around a lot. And with the rapid growth their bodies go through, if their legs aren't moving and holding their body weight, you can have leg injuries, and birds will get used to just kind of sitting around and not walking. So it's important to give them plenty of space. The other thing, I actually just gave them some more food, and this will prove this point real easily. Having multiple feed sites. If I had one trough in here that all 120 of them couldn't eat at, it'd be a melee. But I've got 3 different troughs, so it spreads them out a little bit, so they can everyone can get in and eat, and they're not standing on each other and hurting each other. Actually, birds can get suffocated real easily if they get trampled. The water situation is really important with these guys. I used to have just a couple small waterers in here. Here's a good reason why it's important to have multiples. That one's completely dry, but that's a 5-gallon water, and as you can see, it's still got water in it. So it's real important to spread it out so the birds can go to different areas. Let's talk about the heat lamp. So depending on what time of year you're raising your chicks, may depend on if you have 1 or 2 heat lamps. Right now it's early spring, so we've still got cool nights, and the days get pretty nice. On a day like today, it's a real nice day today. I actually like opening up the garage here so that they can kind of get used to a little bit of air, warm air anyway, so they can kind of get used to some of the outside, get a little sun on them. If it's cooler outside, you may need to have two lamps. One thing with these chickens, they're not the toughest birds, meaning if they get stressed, or they can make some really poor decisions when they get too hot or too cold. And what I mean by that is, if you have one lamp in here, and let's say it gets real cold outside, it's down in the 20s or 30s even, and they feel like they're not warm enough, they will literally all stampede under that light, and they can crush birds. The same goes if they get too hot. If they feel like they get too hot and they're trying to get away from the lamp and they don't have enough space to get away from it, they will all crowd, and you'll show up, and you'll have all the birds that got caught on the bottom. They'll just be crushed and suffocated. So not a good place to be. So it's always important to make sure that your heating is right. Typically these chicks need 95 degrees for the first couple weeks. I'd say until they start getting their feathers in. So, and then as the weather heats up, or they get some feathers, you can kind of back that temperature down. I want to talk about the type of bedding. I'm just using pine chips right now. I've used different bedding in the past. We actually used some homemade stuff that we had shredded up. It was more like a really thick mulch, and these birds just it worked good for about a day or two, but the amount of manure that these guys drop, it actually just caked over the top. I've learned these pine chips can actually absorb it, and the chickens can actually scratch through it as well, so they can actually kind of help turn it over, and the pine chips will absorb some of the manure. The dark stuff in here, I've actually put some leaves down in here. I will also occasionally put grass clippings in mixing with the pine shavings. It's good to keep the chickens active, scratching through it, keeping them entertained, again, just so they don't sit around and just sit down and wait for food to feed. So the heat lamp, depending on how many heat lamps you use, you'll want to move that around your brooder if you can, because obviously they're all going to lay underneath that tonight, and so there's going to be a lot of manure load there. So moving that around the brooder into different positions will help to get the manure spread out. But you will have to clean your brooder with the amount of poop that these guys put out. They eat so much, they drink so much, and it's going to come out their back end. So it's important that you have a plan for how to clean it, so you don't get disease or coccidiosis. Coccidiosis, you can see that's an intestinal disease. You can see it with a little blood in their poop. That'll kill those birds, and that it's caused by having moisture, having too wet of an area, or having too much manure around. So another reason why I like having a large space, I can push these guys with the board over to one side, clean one side, and then move them back over, and then clean the other side, then the whole brooder is cleaned out. So there's multiple reasons for space, keeping space so it's easier for you to navigate around the whole brooder. So I mentioned earlier, these Cornish Cross will go 7 to 8 weeks, and then they're going to be processed. It's so important to keep them active. So do that by giving them space, putting bedding in. Just keeps them moving around. Some of them you can see are flapping around, getting kind of excited. Here's a good example of why I like keeping them active. You guys see that one that's laying down right there? It's just sitting right in the middle of the screen. It's sitting down eating, and you've got other ones here that are standing up. Sometimes these chickens will get to the point where they just sit down, and when they walk, they kind of waddle for a handful of steps, and then they'll sit down. So that's one thing I don't really like about the Cornish Cross, is they're not always like other chickens, and their bodies grow so fast, their legs can, it's pretty prevalent to have leg injuries and leg issues. So I try to get these chicks out on pasture as quick as I can. You want it to be safe, but I try to get them out of the brooder and get them out on fresh grass and eating bugs as soon as I can. Typically my barometer for that is when it's at least 50 degrees at night. We put them out in their hoop coop and make sure they have shelter. If it's still getting down to around 50 at night, I'll still put a heat lamp out there for a night or two to kind of let them get used to it. But I think it's important to get them out and get them eating the fresh stuff as soon as possible. Keeping these birds calm and not stressed is really important. These birds will die, what I'd say pretty easy. You know, if they get stressed out, either because if it's too hot or too cold or too wet, they can just decide to die on you. So, you know, the cold and the wet is really the killer combination. So it's really important to address that. Whether you have windbreaks, you gotta have windbreaks sometimes. You gotta have proper ventilation. Like I said, it just depends on what time of year you're raising them. If you're raising them in the dead of summer, you're gonna have heat issues. As they get bigger, they're gonna have a hard time staying cool because their bodies are so warm because of the rapid growth. If I picked one of these up right now, even one of these over here that's not in the lamp, their body would just be warm to the touch. It's just different. It's different than any other kind of chicken that you've ever held, with how their bodies operate. So, but getting back to getting them out on pasture, I like to get them out as soon as I can, just to get them out of the brooder. Obviously, their manure is great for the pasture, putting down a lot of fertilization that helps us grow grass for the cattle. So this is how we set up our brooder. So hopefully you found this helpful. If you want to continue to follow us on YouTube here, subscribe. Feel free to follow us at CarterJamesRanch.com. We're going to be having more updates posted to the website here soon as we get going here into the spring and the summer. So thanks for watching. Hope you guys have a great day.